you have questions about the ocean, or maybe about our climate or atmosphere? Maybe you want to know, do megalodons still exist? Or what's up with climate change? Is it actually real? Or even mermaids, are they real? These are questions that are all answered in the new book, Megalodons, Mermaids, and Climate Change. There are more questions because they answer questions for, the ocean and atmosphere. These are common questions, and maybe some questions that are not so common that are here to help you. And we have the authors, Ellen Prager and Dave Jones, on the podcast for today to help you answer those questions and discuss their book, where they just help you know about common questions around the ocean and atmosphere. So I can't wait to hear from them. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. Today is a very interesting day because today we're going to be talking about questions around the ocean and atmosphere, questions that I feel people ask all the time, either myself, Dave Jones, who's on the podcast today as a guest, and Ellen Prager, who's also on a podcast today, to talk about their new book that answer the questions that you may have or that other people may have, or maybe you don't even think you have these questions, but you need to know about them, or you want to know about them once you figure that out. And these are fun questions. Some of them are a little more serious. Some of them are fun. They have some snarky remarks to them. They have some fun remarks to them. They have some very serious remarks to them. But they're questions that I feel like everybody should know about. And it's very difficult to kind of do a Google search on them because, as we discussed in the interview, which you'll hear in a second, you just don't know, what information you're getting, if the right question is being answered the proper way, or if it's being influenced by somebody or not. And what I love about this book is that Ellen and Dave have a huge network of meteorologists, scientists, marine biologists, marine conservationists, oceanographers, to help answer those questions if they don't know it, or even if they do, but they want to know the updated information, because all this information is changing as research goes on and on and on. And they have, decades of experience, and they wanted to help out and provide a book that's a resource for you, whether you're 12 years old, whether you're 120 years old, it does not matter. They're here to help you out. And I just can't wait for you to listen to this interview. So let's listen to the interview with Ellen Prager and Dave Jones on the Megalodons, Mermaids, and Climate Change, answers to your ocean and atmosphere questions. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Ellen. Hey, Dave. Welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about really ocean literature, which I'm really excited about?
We're ready.
Right on. I love it. I love this energy. This is going to be a lot of fun. Ellen, this is a returning guest spot for you. I think you were like my second or third guest on the podcast.
Gosh.
It was one of my first. So hopefully I'm a lot better interviewer now than I was back almost 10 years ago. But it's so much fun to be able to have you back. And Dave, welcome to this is the first time you're on the podcast. Hopefully not the last. And we're going to be talking about a new book that you have coming out in October. It's called Megalodons, Mermaids, and Climate Change, Answers to Your Questions and Atmosphere Questions, Ocean and Atmosphere Questions, and I'm excited because I feel like this is a book that is almost perfect timing. Just in general, there's a lot of questions out there, and sometimes the answers are not exactly what you'd expect, or really hard to believe, depending on what sites you're looking at or where you're trying to find those resources. So it's nice to be able to have a book like this in the way it's presented and everything. I think it's going to be really great. So we're going to get into that. But before we do, let's just get reacquainted and acquainted with you, Dave, and reacquainted with you, Ellen. Ellen, why don't you just kind of let us know who you are and what you do?
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Of course.
I am Ellen Prager. I'm a marine scientist by training, but I've had all these amazing jobs, maybe some would say adventures in ocean science, from teaching oceanography on shore for 6 weeks to out at sea for 6 weeks with Sea Education Association. I ran a marine lab in a very remote island in the Bahamas. I have all sorts of stories because that could be a whole other podcast. I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey doing research. I was the assistant dean at the University of Miami Rosenstiel School.
Wow.
Was the chief scientist for the world's only undersea research station. Actually lived twice underwater for 2 weeks. But
So cool.
But what I discovered was I have this real passion for how do we make science entertaining and understandable for people of all ages who aren't necessarily scientists. Oh, and I almost forgot, This is since my last, this is important. Since the last I was on with you, probably my claim to fame
Right.
is I was a consultant on the movie Moana.
Oh, wow.
I
That is cool.
know
No,
that
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But so with this whole idea of communications, I started writing books. I started writing popular science books and children's books. I wrote some eco-adventure novels. And so it's really been about how do we make science entertaining, understandable, and usable for people of all ages.
And tell them what you did on Tuesday.
I love
Works
it.
a lot.
She works a lot, I'm sure. That I know. I can see it in the updates. I've been following you for a while and just seeing like what you're being up to. I didn't know about the Moana thing. We're going to ask some questions about that and how that works. I think that's really cool to be able to do that. And, you know, just numerous speaking opportunities and engagements and being able to engage with people, like you said, who are non-scientists, I feel is so important. I think it's one of the front lines of conservation that we never really think about when we think about becoming marine biologists and marine conservationists. So definitely appreciate the work you do and have been doing and continue to do on this. So really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dave, let's get to know you a little bit. Can you just let us know who you are and what you do?
Sure, yeah. I'm Dave Jones. I'm the founder and CEO of Storm Center Communications, and I'm going to have to step out of the ocean just for a little bit, but I'll maintain the vapor part. I'm a meteorologist, and so we do a lot of forecasting of the atmosphere, right? So in my past included working at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center and their global modeling and simulation division when I was in college, and then a little bit after that, then I worked for a computer weather graphics company, and I helped design computer weather graphic systems that broadcast meteorologists would use around the country and around the world. So I would travel to TV stations around the country and train those broadcast mets how to put together their forecasts and how to put together graphics for their shows. And then I helped a company start up in the Pacific Northwest forecasting winds for windsurfers. That was pretty awesome.
Nice.
And then I ended up working for NBC4 in Washington, D.C. I was a broadcast meteorologist myself for about 10 years in Washington. And that was really the source of a lot of our questions, I think, that we put in the book. And so that's very interesting. And then in 2000, I left NBC and started my own company called Storm Center Communications. And that's what we're doing today, working on a lot of technology to help people share data, access data, and share it amongst other computers in a real-time collaborative environment. So we can all be on the same map looking at the same data, and we can help people understand the value of data and how to trust it for decision making.
You said something at the end that was really important, is that sharing of data. So before, was it just like, you know, different regions had their own silos in terms of they would collect the data, they would present it in their own kind of way, and then another, like the southwest region, the northwest region would have difference compared to the southeast and northeast?
Yeah, Andrew, you have it. Yeah, it's a silo is the key word there, and that's the way that many agencies work and organizations, where they collect and curate their own data, and it's very difficult for anyone else in any other science, or if you don't know because you don't know a specific person how to access the data, it's very difficult. And that's why we developed what we call GeoCollaborate, so we can access disparate data sets and bring them together into one map so everybody can see it in a real-time collaborative environment.
Yeah, and even like I would imagine the way it's displayed before when they're in the silos probably displayed differently from region to region. Now it's all the same, so it makes it just uniform, really easy to make. You know, seeing the connections between the regions. Obviously, you know, the weather doesn't stop at borders, or the weather doesn't stop within regions. So you're probably seeing a lot more, and it's easier for not only meteorologists but also just people in general to be able to interpret those maps, right?
Yeah, and it turns out that the weather has a little bit to do with the ocean, I think, too. So.
just a little bit, eh?
Yeah, it's great. In the beginning of the book that we're going to talk about, so we have a graphic of us having an arm wrestling, and over my head I have a thought bubble says ocean, and Dave over here says atmosphere. So we're, which is more important?
And I'm sweating for some reason while I'm arm wrestling Ellen. I don't know. I have to talk to the
I'm
illustrator.
smiling,
Illustrator,
taking
yeah.
my time.
I love it. Well, it's really interesting too, because, growing up, wanting to be in marine biology, you start, as you learn, both fields, oceans, you have to learn climate. And when you learn climate, you have to learn oceans. Obviously, as we mentioned, they're very, very connected. But, what's interesting is both of you have had such you walk that line of, science and data, but you also walk the line of presenting it in front of people and taking that complex information and being like, here you go. Like, this is what's happening. Like, how, we'll start, Ellen, we'll start with you. It's like, how did you develop that skill set to take the data, talk about even coral reefs, right? Like, you headed a research station, you did a lot with coral reefs, you knew a lot of information. How do you learn that skill set to present it to people of all ages?
So I think there's two things. One, I think you have a passion for it, an interest in doing it. And for me, when I started doing a lot of public speaking and I went on air, I become sort of an on-air expert, and I've been on CNN and NBC and all those.
Right.
I didn't train for that. But
Right.
what I would do is I would learn from my mistakes. And I made many to begin. And so, but I think you have to pay attention. Like, oh, my audience, their eyes are glazing over. They have no idea. And then I would change what I was saying.
Right.
And so I had a passion for doing it. It turns out I think I have an inherent maybe strength because I really like people. I like interacting with people. I like hearing what they have to say and really listening to them. And so my skills have evolved over time just because I've seen what works, what doesn't work.
Right.
And I'm really trying to stay aware of that. If I'm talking to an audience and I've lost them, I'm like, oh, I got to shift gears. So it's not, you can have some natural talent for it, but you have to learn. I learned a lot. Oh my gosh, I look back at my first appearances on television, I'm like, oh. But I have learned a ton by doing it, and now I love it. But it's, also as a scientist at the beginning, I was so nervous because I have to get every single technical detail right.
Yes.
I put a lot of pressure on myself.
Yes.
And when I realized that the people I was talking to, I didn't have to get those technical details exact. They could be right, but maybe a little bit broader, maybe not exact. And it was much easier. So I don't know, Dave, how about you? But that was for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But although when you're a meteorologist, everybody thinks that you get paid for being right 50% of the time, right? So
I was going to mention that. I was like, you're probably in the summer, you're probably the most loved person ever. And then in the winter, and you're like, no. And then if you get the weather wrong or the weather changes, they're like, oh, we hate this guy. Like, why would we?
Oh yeah. And Lord help you if you get a mom's daughter's wedding wrong.
Oh gosh, yes.
Woo, man.
Because that's going to change anything, right? Yeah.
Right.
But now, but it's interesting too, because as a growing up as a marine, wanting to be a meteorologist. Well, I can't even say it. Weather person, let's just say. What is your thought process wanting to be that in that field? Is it you want to be in front of a camera and talking about the weather, or you want to be studying at NASA, which you've been able to do both? What was your thought process going through that career journey?
That's a great question because my first experience with weather was very electrifying. I was 6 years old. I was looking out my bedroom window and I saw lightning strike a tree across the street.
Oh, wow.
And then I saw ball lightning, which is a ball of energy, float out across the street, sort of towards my house. And I was just, 6 years old. I was glued to it. And then all of a sudden it just disappeared in midair and went away. And so that was it. That's all she wrote from I was 6 years old till today. It's meteorology all the way. So
that's crazy. Now, going from like presenting in front of people to doing like research on sort of the climate, how did you sort of manage that? Like, you obviously started off at NASA doing some research areas, and then going into broadcasting. Like, How does that work?
Yeah, it was really very, very interesting. I was very fortunate when I was in college, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit about, asking questions and being curious about things. When I was at University of Maryland, there was a classmate of mine in my cloud physics class. Oh boy. And he said to me, I was working at NASA at the time, and I was in class, and he said, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing TV? I intern over at NBC4." And he said, "You ever think about television?" I said, "No, not really." And
Right.
so he said, "Well, you ought to come over, and just see what I do." So, I was supporting a research scientist at NASA.
Right.
And then I went over to experience NBC, and it's a totally different pace, right? I mean,
Right.
deadlines all the time. You had to be on at 5:15 and
Yeah.
6:15 and all that stuff. So I wasn't on the air then. I was just creating graphics. But the pressure is there to create those graphics to be ready for the chief meteorologist at that time to go on the air. And so I just fell in love I loved supporting research at NASA, but I love the fast-pacedness of news.
Okay. Gotcha.
And so I started to bring some things from NASA over to NBC, like 3D hurricane visualizations. And the meteorologist would put them on the air.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the researcher at NASA got more funding. So it's
okay.
wow, this is pretty cool. So, it's that research to operations transition that I have been fascinated with for a very long time.
That's really cool. I love that. I love that aspect. Now, over both of you, over your times, like your career periods, we've seen a drastic change in our climate. We've been predicting it. You both have probably been predicting it for a while. Hopefully we would never going to see it in our lifetimes, but obviously it's here. We see a lot of consequences due to climate change. Dave, we'll start with you. From your perspective, did you get a lot, were you openly talking about climate change, maybe not on NBC4 like during your broadcast, but was that a topic of conversation during your time throughout your career, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. I think I was exposed to more climate type data as I worked at NASA. And so I almost feel like I grew up at a time when the discoveries were just happening. And so while I wasn't a scientist, I was, did my undergraduate work, but I wasn't a PhD like some people. And so, I just would sit there and observe and listen to the scientists talk. And so I knew there was something going on. And then, of course, when I got in through college and then I started doing other work with, weather graphic systems and stuff and training broadcast meteorologists, I would end up teaching them maybe how to integrate some climate information into their broadcasts. Not formally, but just saying, hey, you might want to compare how many record highs we've been having with how many we had 10 years ago, and giving them those kind of ideas that they would take and run with.
Love that. I love that. Now, Ellen, you've talked to a lot of people over your time being a science communicator and a marine science communicator. How has your message of climate change changed over that time?
Well, that's a tough but good question. So, when I was doing research and in some of the labs that I worked in, I was very heavily involved in coral reefs.
Right.
And I'm not sure, well, I shouldn't say this anymore. I would have said, I'm not sure there's anything that's more obvious, the impacts of climate change, but that's not true anymore. Now with extreme weather events, what we're seeing, it's very obvious. But with coral reefs, I very early on saw the impacts of climate change and the just extreme consequences of prolonged higher water temperatures and having big mass coral mortality events. Got to the point where it was very hard for me to go diving in places where I had spent a lot of time in coral reefs, and to go diving and just see rubble. And it's still very hard for me. I love coral reefs. It's one of the things that got me into marine science. It's in graduate school I worked in coral reefs, and after that I worked in coral reefs. And so I will say, for me at first, I didn't want to talk about the extremes because I thought that was too alarmist. I thought, like you said, we probably wouldn't see them in our lifetime, and we could, we had some time to change our path. But unfortunately, that's not true anymore. And so now I am very willing to talk about the extremes that we're seeing today, and that we don't have any time left. We have to make changes now. And so, because you used to hear that, oh, that person's being an alarmist.
Right. Yeah.
But I think people, between wildfires, flooding,
Oh, yeah.
the rapid intensification of hurricanes, what's going on with coral reefs, it's all very obvious now, the extreme heat. So
Yeah.
don't think it's alarmist anymore to say how big of an issue this is.
Right.
And usually scientists are very conservative, right? They don't want
Yes,
to be
for
out
sure.
on the right side of the bell curve, with, shouting this and that.
Right. And I think in terms of the scientific community, I think you've seen a lot more scientists be willing to say,
A lot more now.
it's not just climate change is real, but it is dire, and we need
Yeah.
to get a handle on it now. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely more of that alarming messaging coming out from scientists, including myself, because we have to, because that's what we're seeing. It's really hard we don't have to predict as much. Like, oh, it's going to come. It's like the droughts are going to come. The wildfires they're here, and they're worse than ever. And I think, one thing that I realized I think what's happening is people are getting personally touched by it, especially here, all over the world. But if we focus on North America, I remember right before last year in 2023, I was saying, in Ontario, we're pretty good. Considering all the damage that's happened on the West Coast and on the East Coast, we're kind of protected a little bit. And we've been finding, of course, lo and behold, I should have knocked on wood when I said it, we had the wildfires of our northern barrier forest across Canada. And we started to get smoke from the north. And not only did we get it, but we saw the images of New York City getting it from northern Quebec, and all that smoke coming in. And now we're saying, okay, now we're starting to, there's no denying it now that something's happening. But I find now, and we'll get into it just because we're going to talk about the book in just a few seconds. I think this is a good segue into it, because you mentioned it on the cover, is you have the words climate change on there. And sometimes that can be a very polarizing phrase to give people, is we're going to talk about climate change now. And some people are like, oh, no, it doesn't exist. Or, still some denial. There's still some, oh, well, we just got to live with it. We've seen the messaging change from various influences. But do you find, for both of you, and Dave, we can start with you, when you speak to people about climate change, do you find that just saying those words change the way the conversation goes in the first place? Do you ever omit those words and just talk about, look, we're seeing flooding, or we're seeing droughts, or we're seeing wildfires, instead of using the words climate change?
Yeah, I typically don't, go into a room and say, let's talk climate change.
Right, yeah.
But we do occasionally, somewhat frequently go into places and listen to other people talking.
Right.
And we do something that would be great for everybody to do, and that is meet them where they are. As they talk, they might be saying, I don't know, I haven't caught anywhere near as many fish as I did this time last year. And we might say, well, what do you think is causing that? What's the problem? I don't know. The ocean seems to be pretty warm. Maybe they don't like warm water. And so, you can start that conversation. You don't really want to start with a kind of polarizing term so they think that you're going to be trying to teach them something, but just talk to them and ask questions. That's the really key thing about this book. And what we try to tell everybody we talk to, ask questions.
Be curious.
You're right. Well, and I think the other part is, if we do bring up climate change and somebody says, oh, well, I don't really believe that. And we say, well, why not?
Why not?
And I think it's very important to be respectful and not condescending. And, a lot of times we'll hear somebody say something and we're like, well, why do you think that? Even if it's something we know is wrong,
right,
based on the data, we want to understand, where did that information come from? Why is it that they are thinking that way? And so I think it's really important to ask questions and listen to other people and just have a respectful conversation. We've had several of those with people who, when we first started, were really skeptical, and then by the end of the conversation, they were like, well, I think, maybe you're right, maybe it is. And so, and again, it's also being able to use the right language. We don't have to speak in science jargony terms to explain
Right.
things. What are people's concerns? So all of that, I think we try and do that when we're talking about that issue.
Well, and I think it's really great. I've heard this from a lot of other people lately as well. And I had a guest on, Janelle Kelman, who she used to be the mayor of City of Sausalito in California. Now she sits on the city council, and she's going to run in 2026 for the lieutenant governorship of California. And she was saying the same thing in the city. She wouldn't mention climate change. She would just kind of like, hey, what's your concern? Like in your city, like talking to her constituents, like, what's your concern? They'd be like, well, I'm worried about flooding, or I'm worried about wildfires, or I'm worried about this. Okay, let's see what policies we could put in place to stop that. And lo and behold, there would be policies that met up with a lot of the solutions that you would see people propose for climate change. But you take the word out, and sometimes, like you said, you meet them where they are. Like, what's your concern? What are you worried about? And I think that we start to see the answers come out, and less of polarization and more of like, well, yeah, this is affecting you and me at the same time. Locally here, we've been having some crazy weather, as the humidity increases. We've had really, really hot weather, but we've been starting to get squalls, which we like squall warnings and flash flooding. And people are concerned that their basements and their backyards and everything is going to continue to flood over time. So we need to make those changes. Forget about climate change. What do we need to do to make those changes, and how do we prepare for the next bout of flooding?
Sometimes I get conversations started by saying, "Hey, let's talk about the rapid warming of the lower boundary layer." And so then,
and that's when I say, "Excuse me, why don't I talk?"
That gets them every time.
I love it. You never know when you might get that, right? You could be at MIT and just somebody comes up and asks you that. But this leads us great into the book, because we talk about asking questions. We talk about being curious, and there are a lot of people who are curious but may not have the ability to get the answers that they want. And not just saying that they don't have the intellect, it's trying to find the right answer to things. We were talking about this before we started recording. Social media and the internet has been wonderful in sharing information, but it doesn't mean you're getting the right information. I remember I grew up without the internet, and in the mid-90s, we started to get internet to our houses, and we started to learn more about the internet. But I remember my teachers, high school teachers, saying, hey, don't always believe what you read on the internet. I think that's changed a lot, where now we rely so much on the internet and so much on information that comes to us that sometimes we believe like the first thing that we see, or that we Google search, or that we, wherever you're searching or watching a video or things like that. It can be very difficult to get that source. And so you can ask that question, but are you going to get the right answers? You have provided a solution for that by both of you putting together this book called Megalodons, Mermaids, and Climate Change: Answers to Your Ocean and Atmospheric Questions. I think it's laid out perfectly. I think this is a book that a lot of people need. Now, how, obviously using both of your backgrounds and your careers, what was the reasoning for this book? And like, why did you guys want to collaborate to do it?
So we love to ask questions. I'll have to tell a little story about Dave.
Okay.
Let's see, two years ago, and it continued this year, I will say, but 2 years ago we were at the American Meteorological Society conference for broadcast meteorologists. And every time somebody would give a talk, at the end of the talk, Dave would go up to the mic, I have a question. And they'd be like, Dave Jones, Dave Jones, Dave Jones, Dave. So at the break, the moderator, the people organizing the conference at the break, came over to Dave and handed him a microphone. He said, you might as well just have your own. But
I didn't have to get up.
You didn't have to get up. It's perfect. Yeah.
But the truth is, then a young meteorologist later in the conference got up to the mic, because they had a mic in the front.
Yeah.
And people wouldn't ask questions. The speaker would stop. Nobody was asked. This young woman got up and she said, I'm really very nervous about asking a question, but hearing Dave Jones, I'm going to do it.
Right. Right.
So
yeah.
We both feel that asking questions is really important. Not only when you're looking at some information, online, you want to ask questions and do some investigation, but when you're giving talks, somebody, we both do a lot of public speaking. We hate it when nobody asks questions. We want people to ask questions. They may make you look at a subject from a different perspective. They may test you to think in a different way. But it's how we learn. There's a sort of in the dedication of the book, it says, questions are the lifeblood of learning.
I
And
like
we
that.
really believe that. And so that was that, and the idea that there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so we thought, what a great way to combat that misinformation by giving the answers to the questions that we and our colleagues most frequently we get, and plus kind of have fun with it with using some like the zany questions or
Right.
things. So we could make it fun and yet very informative.
And having 26 nieces and nephews, I get a lot of zany questions.
Wow, 26 nieces and nephews. That's awesome. Let's make family functions a lot of fun. That's a big. That's
Oh
a,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a big
Football,
party.
baseball, soccer,
Weather.
field hockey,
Everything.
Weather.
Weather, yeah, exactly. I love it. I love it. So now, laying out this book, Dave, I know, Ellen, you've obviously written quite a number of books. Dave, have you ever written a book before?
Well, this is so. Here's the thing. I'm really excited about this one because it's. I know it's going to be my bestseller yet. And okay, yes, it is my first. So,
I love it. Well, it must have been nice too because you had Ellen to help you out with the process, right? Like in terms of like what.
Did you?
Like,
oh yeah,
Careful there.
she's great. She's awesome. I mean, she would say, "Hey, I need to learn about thunderstorms and stuff like that." So I'd write something. I'd give her 6 paragraphs, and she said, "Hey, is this right in 3 sentences?"
We collaborate very well because we
Yeah.
both recognize that the other person has expertise that we don't have, and so and we have the same sense of humor, which is really helpful.
Yeah.
And so we can put in places where we know that they have to be more serious, and we have whenever we can inject a little humor, we'll put that in, and so we just we tend to collaborate very well in that sense. And
That's good.
There are things that we each knew a little bit about, but we needed to do some homework on, so that was good too. And we have between the two of us, we have this amazing network of colleagues that we could go to for questions. We had folks at NASA on space weather and heliophysics that we actually could contact and we talked to. We sent some sections to. We know this amazing climatologist who reviewed this, a lot of the science in the book. So that and they provide us with some of the questions in the book too. So it was great.
Yeah.
Oh, I think that's awesome. Now, were you each the source of the questions for ocean and atmosphere? So, Dave, did you ask ocean questions, and Ellen, did you ask atmospheric questions?
Well,
Is that
we
where
might
the
have
questions came from?
we might have just shared questions, but I think one of the neat things that we did is we did talk to colleagues, and we invited colleagues to tell us what are some of the wacky or zany questions or most frequently asked questions that you get. And I have a network of probably, like Ellen was saying, probably 1,500 broadcast meteorologists. And say, hey, send me some of your wacky questions. If we use them in the book, we'll tell a little bit about you and stuff like that. And we work with NASA and NOAA, like Ellen said, so we can turn to some of those folks that work at the staff level and also at the senior level.
I mean, we got people from the Weather Channel. We got the director of the National Weather Service. We got the administrator of NOAA. Some people that we know, we got them and to tell us their favorite questions. And so, there were questions that we've been asked, our colleagues have been asked, and it was really fun to be able to go out and ask people that sort of question.
That's amazing. And now, when you get to the answers to those questions, you use your backgrounds, you use your colleagues' backgrounds, and the work that they've done, and all the papers that have come out, and you're probably having to search around for new information because obviously everything's being updated as we speak. How do you put all that together in, a succinct and, like, as you mentioned, a little bit of humor at times, a little bit serious at times? How do you put all that together so it's not one long drawn, answer for one question that becomes your book?
I mean, the good thing about Ellen is for the ocean, she knows everything. So we didn't have to go anywhere.
So we very purposefully made sure that the answers are not that long. In fact, in the beginning of the book, we have a little note from us and tells us a little bit about each of us. But we also say this book is not meant to be a comprehensive encyclopedia about each of these topics. Right. And then what we do at the end of the book, for every chapter, we have reference material that we used. And so if people want more detail, they wanted to learn more, they could go there. We just wanted to include in there the essence of the answer. What's
Gotcha.
the essence of the answer, but not go into great detail.
Yeah. We didn't want all the professors around the world
Right.
contacting us, telling us we didn't use the Clausius-Clapeyron equation. You know.
Yeah. And then with the illustrations, we had a lot of fun. We would come up with an idea for, an illustration that fit within a topic, and then we would send them to the illustrator, and we say, here's what our vision is, and she'd send it back, and we'd be like, and so then she was great, and then her name's Elise Birnbach, and we'd send it back, and we'd ask her, can you do this? And it was great working with her, and so we got where we wanted on each of them, and I think there's about 21 illustrations, and then we have some color images in the book too, some photographs, and
I mean, most of my questions to Elise were, could I have some muscles? Could you give me some hair, perhaps? That looks like my teeth, but it's really my mustache. So, there were very deep science questions.
Very deep, very deep. But it's interesting. I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of authors where they put together, they collate a lot of information, and they want illustrations to be done. Can you talk about how important it is to have a great working relationship with also a great illustrator to understand the message you're trying to portray? You've had, like, this one seems like you guys have a great sense of humor. It seems like a lot of fun. Some of the illustrations sound like they're a lot of fun as well, but it also has to be, pertinent to the answer to that question. How important is that relationship to have?
Oh, not only do you have to have somebody you can work with, but you have to be able to go back and forth. And she was really good because I think in our contract it says, like, you have one redo.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, that's gonna be tough. And that was not the case. I mean, there were a couple that went 3 or 4, we have one about lenticular clouds, one of Day's favorites, that people often think are UFOs, but they're really clouds. And she had the illustration, the cloud. We just were like, that's not really what they look like. And so it's like, can you draw them more like this? And we would send her photographs.
Right.
And we'd say, can it look more like this? And it's very important. And again, part of it, and this is also in writing, and when you get to the point of editing things, you have to take your ego out of it. You need to have a good relationship with an illustrator, a good relationship with an editor. It's not about what you want or what you personally, it's what works the best. What's going to be the best thing.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah, and the first time I met or saw Elise was at a natural hazards conference in Colorado. And it was really amazing because there was a session going on. She was on the side of the room sketching out in real time the conversation. And by the end of the session, there was an entire summary with sketches of what we talked about. And she drew ecosystems, she drew, the sun and fish and birds and people interacting with each other. And it was done by the session time.
So think about this. Think about like the speed and accuracy of the way she's able to do that in that time frame. It's crazy. That's insane. Yeah, I didn't realize how important it was to have an illustrator. I thought having an illustrator, you just have to have an illustrator, but having that working relationship is so important. So it's great to hear.
Yeah, and to understand your vision. I mean, if she thought we just wanted straight illustrations, it probably would have been difficult. But when she figured out that we were looking for the humor bent in it, it changed it. The illustrations changed a little bit.
She's like, okay, I like you guys.
She's like,
I want to work with
now
you.
she's like, I get it now.
Gotcha.
Yeah, right.
That's nice.
Should we tell about our favorite illustrations?
Well, if you want to.
So we have a lot, but one of our favorite ones, and it gets back to where do you get your source of information? Yeah. And so, you want to make sure that the expert you have is really the expert in the topic that you're talking about. So we have an illustration of a cow, and there's a veterinarian with
a glove,
with a
big
glove
on.
You know what that's, and doing his thing.
And
doing his
cow's
thing.
looking back like this.
Like what?
What? And then there's a farmer, and the farmer's saying to the vet,
the vet, what do you think? And the vet says,
what do you think about climate change?
And he says, no, climate change isn't real. as he's got his arm up there.
Yeah, so we're like,
and so it's like, wait a minute, you're a vet, right? You're not a scientist or environmental scientist.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's all about, who's your source of information.
For sure. I love that. Now, and speaking of that is, who is this book designed for? We talked about people who have curiosity, but everybody has curiosity at every different age group. And it's always good to these books tend to target a specific age group and demographic and just audience. Ellen, typically your books in the past have done more like tween and teen, to get a hold of that. So has this changed?
Yeah, so I kind of have a range of books.
Okay.
So I've written young kids' books, which are 4 to 7 illustrated. I've written some middle schooler adventure novels, but I've also written quite a few books that are popular science. And that's what I would call this. It's popular science, which typically the target is high school and above.
Yeah.
But it's also, there are some very ambitious middle schoolers who would like it too. And we think one of the best audiences will be educators and science communicators, like informal educators, because we know they get these questions.
And Uncle Joe too, because he knows everything.
So the target audience is really, how do you like to say, from
12 to 120.
I think that's good, nice and narrowed down range. I like that. But these are questions. I mean, these are questions that are asked by all that everybody within that age group, right? These are common questions where sometimes, like for us scientists, sometimes we're like, well, how do you not know that? But a lot of people don't know this kind of stuff. That information is not available, and they need to know the answer to those questions. So I think it's important.
And here's the thing too, is that I would get asked this all the time, and it's actually not in this book, but I would get asked all the time, how did you become interested in weather, and how did you figure out it could be a job?
Right.
And so, it is in the book, but people would say, I love the weather, I just never knew I could make money at it. And so what I realized early on was that everybody at some point in their life probably wanted to be a meteorologist.
Yeah.
Because they're watching the weather. You're see that new. There's a new.
But I have to interrupt.
Yeah.
Because it's really they want to be marine biologists.
Well, maybe
They really want.
it's possible.
They said those sharks.
Yeah.
Dolphins,
I have to admit, when I tell people I'm a marine biologist at like parties and things like that, they're telling me, "Oh, I always wanted to be marine, but I didn't know you could make a career out of it."
Exactly. So see, they're very similar.
Very similar.
And then you probably get, you get to pet the dolphins.
Oh yes.
And
then I go into my speech.
Right?
Yeah, and then I go into my speech about dolphins, and then they're like, "Oh no, I don't want to pet dolphins anymore."
But it's also really interesting. So we have some wacky questions which we could talk about, but there are also some really important questions in this book, and I'm going to give you an example.
Perfect.
So related to the news right now.
Okay, perfect.
Just came out that there was a storm in St. Petersburg, Florida, and a group of teens sheltered under a tree. Tree got struck by lightning, and one of those teens very tragically passed away.
Oh, that sucks.
People have this misunderstanding that a tree is a safe shelter in lightning, and we have a whole chapter on lightning, and a lot of it is about safety.
Right.
And one of the things we very clearly say is do not shelter under a tree because it conducts lightning and it through the ground, and you do not want to be there. So in addition to the wacky and the fun questions and, just some other, things that I think people are curious about, we also have some really important questions.
Oh yeah. And regarding lightning and trees, I mean, I think a lot of people run under a tree to stay dry.
Right.
And they don't want to get wet. But unfortunately, it's a thunderstorm, and lightning likes to strike the tallest objects. And we've seen it. We saw it several years ago, just outside of the White House in Washington D.C.
Yes, I remember
4
that.
people went under a tree to get away from a storm. Lightning struck, and 3 out of the 4 of them were killed.
Yeah, it's terrible. And that should not be happening. And it's all about education and awareness.
Yeah.
And so that's, we hope, Yeah, we're answering some fun questions and things that people are curious about, but there are also some really important things about hurricanes, lightning, climate change, all of that. So it's, again, we always say we have a lot of fun, but we also have some really important topics in there.
Well, and I think that also goes to what you mentioned earlier, Ellen, was to meet people where they're at. And, that's a common thing. I mean, you think about, right when you said that, I think about, a soccer field. Usually there's multiple soccer games going on. You're in an open field. There may be a few trees that are around, a few large trees that are around. You get the downpour. People are running. They're panicking. They're either going to their cars, or if they're not, they go under a tree and they wait under a tree. And then you have some people, don't stand under that tree. No, it's fine to stand under that tree. No, don't. And then you get the sort of the local lore of, yes, it is good, or no, it's not. And these kids are going to listen to their parents one way or another, because that's their safety net, right? That's what they go for. And it's really, I agree with you. It's really important that these questions come out again and again and again, even though we think, that's a simple question to answer,
Right.
but people don't know, just based off the couple of examples. And that could be life-threatening, at times. Right. And we don't want to see that, obviously. Right. So I think that's really important.
Well, we have sharks are in there, jellyfish are in there.
Nice.
So
is the question about jellyfish? You don't need to pee on somebody's foot if they get stung by a jellyfish? Is that?
Yes. So that is a major question. In fact, we even have an illustration in there and about that question, and we explain the science behind why the answer is
no.
So we explain why you don't. It could actually make it worse.
Right.
Not only is it disgusting, it could make it worse.
Yeah.
So of course.
I
Of
love
course
that.
we have that in there.
Awesome. Well, speaking of questions, you seem to have a lot of really interesting questions, some fun and some, obviously serious. Dave, I'm going to ask each of you this, but Dave, I'll ask you first. What was your favorite question to answer in that book?
Oh, gosh. Well, I did like them all. I think one that's really quite popular now, and it has been for a number of years, are when people go outside and they look up and they see jet planes fly over and they see the contrails coming out of the jet plane. Well, there's a certain group of people who think that they are chemtrails and that the government is spraying us so they can alter our minds to think a certain way. And of course, that's not true. Contrails are condensation trails out of the back of a hot jet engine, and it's very cold up there. So you're immediately having the temperature meet the dew point. It creates a cloud, it becomes a cirrus cloud made of ice crystals. And sometimes an airplane will fly through a pocket of dry air, and so the contrail doesn't form because it evaporates that moisture right away.
Okay.
But then when it hits air that's more moist and can support a cloud, it will re-show up, right? And so some people say, aha, they're not spraying there now, but look, they are spraying over here. And so if they would just take a little bit of time to understand some science, then, it might not be so pervasive.
So would it be safe to say, a question that I just got from that, I mean, you could probably answer these questions all day. You look at areas, say like Arizona, very dry area. Is it still dry at the sort of the 35,000 feet of a jet that would fly? And would you see those contrails?
That's a great question. So Arizona is very dry at the surface.
Right.
But the atmosphere, you can think of a whole bunch of layers, a lot of layers. And each one of those layers can have moisture in them. And so that's what determines levels of clouds that you see during the day. As a matter of fact, how moist is that layer of the atmosphere to produce a cloud? And where you don't see clouds, where it's clear, it's too dry, or the air is pressing down. That's why high pressures are good, because they're pressing down air, and vertical motion creates clouds, descending motion gets rid of clouds.
Okay.
So you can have different layers over Arizona, and you can see those contrails up there.
I got to get this book, because even I'm learning things off of this. This is awesome. Ellen, I'm going to ask you, and Dave, I apologize before because I asked you what your favorite question is. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of questions in there that you probably liked, as you mentioned. So, Ellen, I'm going to change the question up. What was one of your favorite questions to answer?
Well, so the jellyfish one was one of my favorites, but
Yeah.
one of the others, you already actually mentioned it, is Megalodons. I
Yes.
do a lot of public speaking, and I know you and my colleagues get,
Oh,
you know,
yes.
well, how do you know that they're not still alive in the deep sea? We've only explored less than 10% of the ocean. You just said that. How do you know they're not down there? And so I go through the scientific evidence as to how we know they are not still alive. And one of my favorite, you know, there's several lines of evidence, but one is that, as you well know, sharks produce about 40,000 teeth during their lifetime.
Yeah.
40,000 during their lifetime, like a conveyor belt.
Right.
If there were giant sharks with teeth 7 inches long, producing 40,000 teeth a year,
That's terrifying.
and we know that they liked productive waters in the subtropics, so they're probably pretty close to shore, we would find some.
Yeah.
But the only teeth we find are fossilized teeth, millions of years old. So we know they're not still in the modern ocean.
Yeah.
And so, you know, giving the actual scientific evidence how we know they're not still alive
Yeah.
is really important. So that I would say is one of my favorites.
So the movie The Meg is not real, is what you're trying to say. That's fiction. Then.
It is not. It was fun though.
It was fun. I watched it.
I'm not against.
It made a lot of
of
belief.
course.
I'm not against those kind of movies where
Yeah.
they're so, you know, kind of outrageously fun, and
Yep.
they're not supposed to be taken as real science.
No.
Now, the other kind of things, there are the mockumentaries that have
Oh,
little,
yes.
that have the little, you know, disclaimer. This
Yeah.
is not real.
3-point font going
Yeah,
out the
exactly. Nobody can see
That I
that.
have a problem with.
Of course. Yeah, because there was a famous one. I think we're probably thinking of the same one. It was
Yes.
during Shark Week. They had, like, you know, quote unquote NOAA scientists on
Right.
there, and they weren't real. They were just actors. And I think they tried to play a spoof on everybody. And I just remember the comments after on social media, like, I'm never going in the ocean again. And I can't believe, you know, we haven't heard about this
Right.
before. And it's amazing the power of communication and what that can do from an advantageous point of view in education, and then what it could do is just put the living fear in everybody from going in
Right.
the ocean, and
And the
obviously
power
we
of
don't want that.
visualization, right? The
Yeah.
power of visualization. The more real
Yeah.
you can make something look, the more believable, you know, people think it is. And it's
Yeah.
the same thing with weather. If you
Yes.
can, we're doing some work right now trying to make flood levels be
Yeah.
as realistic as possible, so people understand not their house might be above the water, but the road and the critical infrastructure is all going to be messed up, so they better evacuate. You know, you need that kind of level of realistic visualizations.
What I find really interesting to me, and I think this happens a lot of places, not just in North America, but the lack of information when people buy houses or move into an area. We have people moving all over countries and halfway across the world now, where you can work anywhere in the world, and you don't know where those floodplains are. You that were either built over or they're still there, but there's infrastructure there that, like you mentioned, Dave, like that will get flooded, that's expected to get flooded. And you know, usually the people who know are the insurance companies, or the government, but a lot of residences who buy a certain land plots or houses or apartments or whatever that might be, or businesses, and they all of a sudden they realize, hey, all of a sudden my place is being flooded by 5 feet, or you know, even if it's just a little bit of wet basement, or you know, we had a storm here where a storage place, the office got flooded 5 feet. Like insane amounts.
Wow.
And that had never happened before, because those are designed for 100-year storms, but those are happening more and more now. So it's I find it really interesting how we don't get that. So having a tool like that would be really, really great for that availability for everybody to be shared.
Yeah, and then you have a husband and wife and kids. They buy a house, they move in. The kids are playing in the backyard. They bring back a whole bucket full of seashells, and they say,
Yeah.
"Look, Dad, look at all these seashells." He's like, "We don't live near the ocean. What are they doing here?" It's like, "Oh, the big flood must have brought that."
Yeah, exactly. Now you know this is a book that answers. How many questions do you answer? Like, do you know the number?
We actually have never counted.
Wow. No, I'm
I
not
assume it's
sure.
quite a bit. I assume it's
There's
more
There's
than
a lot.
There's
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
That's our answer. A lot.
A lot. Okay. So now, obviously, this is not like a finite amount of questions. There are a lot of other questions that you can answer. I know this is, you know, we're talking about releasing this as the first edition. Do you think, you know, is there a will and a want to do another edition? And obviously it'll make sure that after a lot of people buy this, you'll probably be like, yes, let's do this again. But do you think there will be opportunities to follow up this with answering more questions?
You want me to answer that? You want to answer?
Okay, you answer.
Well, my thought in the beginning is, since I'm not the main writer, I think we should do a whole bunch of them. No. I'm, in all seriousness, I think the book will kick off, hopefully, a lot more curiosity and a lot more questions that people have.
Yeah.
And I think that our networks between, marine and ocean and atmosphere, I anticipate getting contacted by people saying, you should ask this, or you should answer this. And so hopefully the momentum of the book will just kind of drop the second volume in our laps, and we just have to say, let's answer these.
We'll see.
But the publisher will come back and is like, you have to do a second one.
It's my first book, her 21st.
Yeah,
so she
exactly.
might have a different.
After my last popular science book, I said, Dave, I was exhausted. I was like, it was a lot of work. I was like, if I ever say I'm going to do another one of these books, smack me over the head. then it was like 2 months later, hey, I think I have this really good idea. And I was like, and Dave's like, didn't you say like I should like smack you if you ever
Yeah.
And then she said, no, you're involved. And I said, okay, let's do it.
Now let's do it. I'm in. Well, I love it. I think this is great. And it's available for pre-sale. It's coming out in October 2024. It's available for pre-sale right now. I'm going to put the link to the Amazon link for everybody so they can go buy. I highly recommend to buy this. I know I'm going to be buying a few copies and giving them out to some people because I think it's really interesting. If you're I would say if you're a teacher, if you're an educator in any kind of these are great to buy. Not just one, but buy for students. Give them away. Share them with people because I think this is a book that's really, really necessary. I'm so happy that both of you wrote this book and answered these questions. I know it definitely, you look at that range. I always think, kids need to learn about this, but here I am, a scientist of 45, about to turn 46, being like, no, I got to get this book. I got to read this kind of stuff. I think this is definitely needed, as I mentioned, and I'm really happy that you all did decide to do this. And so thank you for coming on and sharing this. The energy between you is awesome. I love having you on. Feel free to come back. Let us know how it goes and other projects as well. I'd love to chat with both of you again. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for having us on.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Dave, for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. The energy that these two bring to the table and to this podcast is electrifying. No pun intended, but it is electrifying. You have to admit, if you've listened to that entire episode and you listen to that interview, you realize you're like, wow, these people are quite entertaining, but they have the knowledge to help you get educated on a lot of these questions that people have. You yourself might have, other people, you may not realize these questions needed to be answered, or you didn't know the answer to them maybe. And that's something that is really handy about this book. So with that said, I am going to put the link to this book, which comes out in October 2024, but you can pre-order it. And I highly recommend that you pre-order a couple because you want to give some of these away. Some of them maybe to some, nieces and nephews. Maybe you want to give away to your kids. Maybe you want to give away to your grandkids. But if you have any child or anybody at any age who's curious about the ocean and the atmosphere, one or the other or both, I think this book is for them. So I'm going to recommend it to everybody to go out and buy that book. The link is in the show notes or in the comments below, depending if you're listening to this on YouTube or audio-wise or on Spotify. It doesn't matter. There's going to be a link in there for you to pre-order. I highly recommend that you pre-order a couple, and hopefully there'll be more books coming out in the future. There is an audiobook coming out too, and you're going to love that as well. So lots of ways to purchase this. I can't wait for you to purchase this. Let me know what you think of the book and how excited you are for the book, and please review it. But this is going to be one of those books that I feel is going to be a resource for a lot of people in the future. So that's it for today's episode. If you want to stay in touch, please follow, subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and leave comments. I'd love to hear what you thought of the episode, whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, or if you want to get a hold of me, you can do so by going to my Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean, all one word, and just DMing me. Love to hear from you. And I want to also thank Ellen, and Dave for joining us as well, of course. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.